Welcome to the SkirtWork podcast.
Hello there, welcome to SkirtWork, and I'm still Manda Milling.
And I'm still Lisa Johnson.
And we are talking this week about what, Lisa?
Well, it's a bit of a hot topic at the moment, and I do want to come at it at a slightly different angle, but we're going to talk about domestic violence. But the angle I want to take, because there's a lot of very valuable conversations happening around Australia about domestic violence and what a scourge it is. But today I want to talk about domestic violence leave in the workplace, because all employees in Australia are entitled to paid domestic violence leave.
And we do a lot of work with New Zealand. We have a business there in New Zealand, and we follow pretty much their policy over there too. So they've got one as well. Because I'd like to say first off that there's plenty of experts out there dealing with this dreadful, dreadful issue, and we're not going to touch on any of that because we are not expert in those fields, but we will have a chat about what we know a little bit about.
Exactly. And we're also here to try and point people in the right direction. So if they have questions, that they know who they can talk to about it.
Sure.
So, Manda, let's talk about the beginnings of domestic violence leave in Australia. That was brought in under the previous government, and initially it was 5 days unpaid leave. But they've changed it now, and all employees, including casuals, are now entitled to 10 days every year of paid domestic violence leave.
And for small businesses as well. That was longer to kick in when the legislation was passed, but it now applies to all businesses, applicable to all businesses.
Okay. So I went on to the Fair Work Ombudsman site, and to be honest, that's where I'm going to direct everybody who's got questions about this. But we're going to talk about what domestic violence leave can be used for. And so Fair Work says it could be used for making arrangements for their safety. So a person can apply for it because they're making arrangements for their safety or the safety of a close relative, including relocation, for attending court hearings and accessing police services. The leave doesn't need to be taken all at once. It can be taken as single or multiple days. So you may only need to take 1 day's leave, or you may need to take potentially the whole 10 days at once. Importantly, this leave does not accrue. So, Manda, do you want to explain what that means?
That means that, well, like your annual leave and your sick leave, if you don't take annual leave and sick leave in a particular year, it then goes over to the next year. It follows over to the next year. So you might, in Australia, you get 20 days annual leave, and if you don't take those 20 days that accrue at 1.6 days per month, then once again, it folds over into the new year and you can accrue. Now, there's a lot of businesses will say, look, we really want you to take some annual leave, because when you do pay your annual leave, it is at your current salary rate. So obviously, over the years, one would hope you're getting salary increments each year. So it obviously becomes more expensive for the business. So but the other side of it, they want you to take a holiday. Yeah. It's a good business practice, good for your physical and mental health, but it's also good practice risk-wise for a business, because you've got somebody that never, ever, ever takes leave. You probably want to see what they're doing when they're not in the office, if I can put that in a non-Big Brother way, but particularly in some areas that deal with cash and all that kind of thing. So it's not a bad idea. Sick leave is the same, and you can accrue that. You get 5 days when you first start in Australia, and then it goes to 10, but you can accrue that. So between Lisa and I, because we've been with one employer for a very long time, we have got an enormous amount of sick leave, and not quite as much as annual leave, because Lisa and I do take our holidays.
We do like our holidays.
But the thing is that when you leave your employer, you get paid out your accrued annual leave that you have accrued and built up. It's another word for building up, but you don't get your accrued sick leave paid out.
And just before we segue back into the domestic violence leave, just talking about that sick leave, because sick leave covers more than you've got the flu.
Right. It's now actually universally called, I'll probably be a bit old-fashioned saying that, it's actually called personal leave. So it can be used for a whole myriad of, it's still got the same amount that you're accruing, but you can be used for quite different sets of circumstances.
And a common one that's used is when your child's sick.
Indeed.
And you need to take a day off work.
Carer's leave.
So it becomes carer's leave, which is covered under that personal leave category.
Well, it's the same as bereavement leave. They were all defined as different types of leave, but it's sort of all been lumped into personal leave. So you need to attend a funeral and, all of the things that happen in life, then it can come under personal leave.
And it basically comes out of that 10-day entitlement.
Yeah.
Okay,
which
cool.
people do accrue. So quite often you will find that people will have, and we'll get onto this a bit down the track, you have to actually, your employer is entitled to ask for evidence, so that typically has always been a medical certificate, but there are different types of evidence that you can actually show, or you may be required to show by your employer.
But the difference with domestic leave is that it's 10 days per year, and you don't accrue it. So if you haven't taken 10 days, then next year you don't get 20 days and so forth. It's just designed for the 12-month period. And looking at the rules on it, you get it from day one. So you're entitled to it from the first day you start working, and then it renews on your anniversary for the next 10 days. And interesting because is the inclusion of casual staff.
Yes, and that's a relatively newer development as well, because obviously we also have different definitions of what a casual employee is as well.
Such a minefield.
Yes.
Like, seriously, Manda
so
and I we could go down that rabbit hole.
And we will never have anybody listening to us ever again, and we certainly won't be getting any more subscribers. And please subscribe if you haven't already.
But typically, if you're employed as a casual employee, so we won't go into all the definitions of what that is, but typically you're not entitled to annual leave and you're not entitled to sick leave. You're in fact paid in a higher pay rate that offsets it. So there's a loading in your pay rate that offsets your entitlement. But that doesn't apply to domestic and violence leave. You're entitled to paid leave right from the get-go. Okay, so we're very lucky because and our employees are very lucky because they've never had to.
No, we've never had anyone yet, and I'm really glad. I hope we never do, obviously, but in Australia or New Zealand, as of
right now,
2024.
Right, as of right now,
I'm knocking on wood there.
So we're going to, because it seems to me it's fraught. It's a highly emotional topic. People who are experiencing domestic violence, there's an incredible amount of anxiety and stress, which can lead to all sorts of
and also the definitions of it, Lisa.
Yeah.
So we're talking, when we hear domestic violence, we obviously think of physical violence, and that's quite often what hits the papers, if you want to mix the media. But then, of course, we also have in New South Wales coercive control. And as we know, with tracking apps, which are used for stalking and all of these dreadful things that, as I said, the police and people much more au fait with all of this than Lisa and I are involved with. But yes, so people have an understanding of what it actually can be applied to.
And I think that can be a struggle for employers. Like if you're making an assumption that somebody has to be beaten black and blue for you to recognise domestic violence, then there's a bit of a problem there, because usually perpetrators of this kinds of violence are very good at not leaving bruises visible for other people to see.
And coercive control has bruises, but none of us can see.
No. And, I think...
just want to point out there that most of the violence is meant against women, but can we just please, this is a minority of men that do this. As we know, the men in our lives, this is basically, tarring us all with the same brush, as they say. So, no, it's not. So thankfully, it's just that obviously the incidents we read and hear about in the media are so utterly horrific that, of course, it makes the media because they're utterly horrific. And so there's a lot of wonderful men out there that just say, please, don't put me in this category.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that particular one is a really difficult.
It is.
It's really, really difficult. My partner is a good man.
Yeah.
He would never raise a hand to me. He's not coercive unless it's to get me to pay for the pizza.
Yeah.
He's a really good man, but the discussion around this is really confronting for men, and they are really struggling to come to terms with it without feeling personally affronted by it.
But also, I think a lot of this discussion, the ship has sailed, if I can put that in our age group. It's the younger ones, I mean, we've got a 20-something in our household, and, obviously, I'm not going to get the role models, all that kind of thing, but I think a lot of that discussion, they're picking all of this up too, and they see that horrific stuff. But you've also got to explain to them, it's not the stuff that's just making the media. There's a lot of other stuff going on underneath it as well, that these difficult conversations and about respect and the whole thing. Anyway, we're getting off the topic probably, I think, as well, but
we are a little bit. But if I was just going to sort of, I've really struggled with this because my partner really does find it a difficult conversation. And he's quite angry about it. And I was talking to a good friend about it, and her husband's exactly the same. And she said, you if you try and discuss it, it becomes a bit of an argument because you're trying to explain why women might feel a certain way, and they just feel like you're accusing them of being an abuser, and that's not what's happening. But I think it does come down to some really basic fundamentals that as women we learn from a really young age to be aware.
Well, can I give you a couple of examples that happened this week? And just what you were saying just brought it to mind. So when our 20-something comes home from the bus, it's dark now that we're coming into winter here in Sydney or Australia, and he goes down a set of stairs. It's dark where he goes down. And he was saying to me the other night when he came back, he said, I was coming from the bus. So this is only probably about 6 o'clock at night from the bus, and his boots make a bit of noise, and he's coming down and he's behind a woman with a young child. And he was walking behind, and then all of a sudden he's just walking normally, and she's just then stepped to one side with the child to let him go ahead. And I said, you do understand why she did that? And I said, it wasn't because she's walking slowly. It's because she wanted you ahead of her, not behind her. And he understood that. And because he's thinking, well, I'm not going to do it here. I said, no, but you've got to understand, when you walk through a car park with the keys in your hand and that kind of thing. And the other time was the fact that he followed this woman because they're just on the way home, I'd just like to say, coming from the bus down this, we call it the Vale. So it's sort of a dimly lit set of stairs. It cuts through, and it's, I would probably walk down there, I've got to be honest, later at night, but 6 o'clock at night, everyone is. So she's walking in, and he said every turn she made, it's exactly the route he takes to get home. And in the end, he could feel her footsteps quickening. So he slowed right down and just let her go. And I told him I was very proud of him because he was aware of that, because you've got to understand, hearing footsteps behind you, you see it's a young guy and he's just going about his business. And I said, unfortunately, this is where we've landed. But I said, you need to be aware of that. And so you understand. Now, if it was a bloke in front of you, probably wouldn't even given it a second thought. But I'm very glad that you are aware that so he understands. Well, yeah, he understands. And also because he's got a girlfriend that would basically tell him as well. But I thought that only happened this week.
It's an extraordinary demonstration of it, Manda, because what it's showing is,
and I'm glad he told me about it.
We get the whole not all men thing.
Yeah.
But that woman, she knows it's not all men, but she doesn't know which man.
No, exactly right, 100%. And she was with her young child and protective, and like we always would be. And he said, and he really noticed that. And he said, oh, should I have said, look, I'm not, I said, no, you just don't say anything. Because even you saying I'm not here, she might misinterpret that as something else. Just go about your business and whatever. But at least I was very pleased. Well, first of all, he brought it up with me because he knew that I would have an opinion on it. And I said, you do understand why those two women did that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all right. we've managed to segue from domestic violence leave, which
leave.
we're going to come
get
back to,
to.
but we're going to go and have a quick break.
Yes.
And then we'll be back.
At P2P, you will have a tailored consultant that has an expert knowledge in a particular industry.
We have great technology in place. We have a really great relationships with lots of different clients and a lot of candidates in the market. We have specialist consultants within the team.
Internationally recognised, so there is an opportunity to collaborate with many different branches. But from a proactive perspective, we are able to answer clients' needs.
I'm really proud of what we stand for and how we operate. We always operate with integrity, professionalism, and we really pride ourselves on providing the best service to our client.
All right, so we're back. And I'm going to go back to the domestic violence leave.
Yes.
Because one of the things that is an interesting part of it is that your employer can ask you for evidence. So I'm not saying that they necessarily would do this, but an employer is entitled to ask for evidence to support your application for domestic violence leave. And so the kind of evidence that they can ask for, so you can use a statutory declaration, documents that have been issued by the police, documents issued by a court, or family violence support service documents. So let's talk about stat declarations, because I think a lot of people think that's just where you write down and sign on a piece of paper to say that this is why you've taken leave. But a stat dec, actually a statutory declaration, so that's what we call a stat dec, actually needs to be notarized by an appropriate person.
So I have done them. I'm a JP in New South Wales, a Justice of the Peace. So from someone like myself, normally you'll find it's a professional of some sort. So it might be a doctor, a lawyer, a CPA, a certified practicing accountant. They're the sort of typical. There's a list of people that can witness and sign a stat dec on your behalf.
And if you were, say it was a last minute thing and it sort of came up, would you be expected to provide that evidence on the same day, or do you think it would be reasonable for an employer to say, look, I'm going to need that before payments made to justify
I think
it?
it's not case by case, and I think it depends on so many different things. I mean, it's a difficult thing if you've just started a new job and you're just in probation and all of this stuff happens. I know that would be a very difficult situation for both parties. And also, when you're asked for evidence, it's not from the position that the employer doesn't believe you. It's just that they may be required, part of the company procedures is that before you pay out for people that aren't available to do their job for whatever reason, they need some form of documentation. So in our business, it's more than 2 days consecutive for sick leave and a doctor's certificate. Doesn't have to have the reason why, once again, because of privacy, but they're unfit. And that can be whether that's a mental illness or a physical illness. We don't require it every single day if you take a day off, but like a lot of employers, we reserve the right that if we get a pattern of every Monday and Friday being taken as sick leave, we will reserve the right to say, well, we now need a medical certificate, and that does need to be a proper medical certificate, not something which we have had in the past of people we know download from the interweb. No. So we are aware of, because somebody is. But look, that was not an uncommon thing. So domestic violence takes it one step. So, and also around domestic violence leave as well, as Lisa, I know you're going to get into, it's these higher levels of privacy.
Oh, yes.
And in a business like ours, where we have on-hired casual staff, which is what we do for a living, fraught.
Yeah. So just like if you're a small business owner, I'd like to speak to you right now. I know it's really difficult running a small business, but privacy and confidentiality is so important. If you've got somebody that's coming to you and are bringing you evidence of domestic violence, you have to, by law, protect that information. You can't share it with anybody else without their permission. It can't be a topic of conversation in an office. You have to respect the privacy of that person. You also cannot use it against them. Like, the legislation actually is quite clear that you can't discriminate against a person who's experiencing domestic violence. Now, I know that it is difficult running small businesses, and if staff are taking a lot of leave, it's incredibly frustrating, but you're not allowed to fire somebody because they're the victim of domestic violence.
So where it gets tricky is that they've had their 10 days. And these are all scenarios that, in extreme examples, and then they probably don't have any leave left. And so they then need to take the rest of the year off of leave without pay. Now, that's not, but it is costing an employer because they don't have particularly when small business of under 15 employees, every job is vital for the operation of that business. That then gets tough. And then how do you explain someone being away for an extended period of time when you're then trying to juggle privacy?
Yeah.
And because it could come from even a gossipy or toxic place, someone genuinely concerned, where's Lisa been? Because it's obviously you're very aware when you're in a company of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that no one really knows, but you're very, very intimately involved with these people day to day.
Yeah. I look, I can only imagine how difficult it is. But the onus is on the small business owner to do the best thing by their employee.
Please. And absolutely, I think 99.9% absolutely want to.
And
because they're so hard to find.
Right. But the other thing I would just do is I would be encouraging them just to continue having conversations with those people, because it may end up that due to the particular circumstance, the person may have to leave their job anyway because they need to relocate so that somebody can't find them. So it may be a bit of a moot point. And what I would personally say is just keep talking to people and asking them what support they need and what they, what support that you can provide. And I don't necessarily mean financial support. It could be an ear to listen to them. It could be to help them access services that they can't access at home because they're the victims of coercive control, or the person that they're dealing with is very controlling with phones and internet
And this is
access.
if they've actually shared the information. Now, there's a lot of people suffering in silence.
Yeah.
And yes, there are some men, let's not be sexist about it. Obviously, the overwhelming majority that we hear about are women, but there are some men too. And I could imagine if you are working in your panel beating business and one of the blokes is being subject, I can't see they're going to share a lot of stuff. Now, maybe I'm making a generalisation, but I think that would be very, very tough.
Yeah.
I think. And even for a woman in a small... See, the other side of it, we aren't a small business, but we have a database and we have a lot of people being able to access details of, where people access them to see if they're available for work, that we can get them out on a job and all that kind of thing. Well, of course, we've got to be very, very careful how this information is stored. Now, our business is subject to the Privacy Act. Well, this is Privacy Act on steroids. Probably poor choice of words given some of the domestic violence occurred. But nevertheless, so we have to be very, very aware that this is not readily available information. Exactly. Now, thankfully, we've got checks and balances in place. But like anyone, we're learning too.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the burden on some of these small businesses. You're running your panel beating shop and then you've got to deal with this as well. Well, you did a panel beating trade. You're certified professional in that regard. You haven't been taught how to do this.
No. And I think that's a huge issue in Australia, that there's a huge burden upon small to medium businesses, and the law says ignorance is not an excuse, but there's nothing in place to ensure that people go through training, that ensure that small businesses even know where to access the information that they need to. We know, and I'm just going to talk about changes that Fair Work do around like the minimum wage. But Fair Work also consistently looks at other things. They put other legislation into the award system, into the employment, well, not employment, but industrial legislation.
Yeah, which keeps us all very busy. Thanks for that.
And it's continual, and we struggle to keep up with it, let alone a small business. And it is predominantly put in to protect employees because, look, we can't deny in Australia that we've had dreadful instances of bad employers exploiting workers. It's happening all the time, and some of it's just through sheer ignorance, and some of it is because bad people are bad people.
I think they are a very small minority, the really shocking types. I think a lot of it is with, I know we've seen high-profile restaurateurs and all that kind of thing fall foul. Well, struggling through that modern award system for casual and modern awards in that arrangement is, we don't do that kind of recruitment because it's just mind-boggling.
Well, I think, look, this would be my criticism of the modern award systems. I feel like they've been written by lawyers for lawyers. They have sharpened things up in the sense that they're set out consistently. So if you know how to find an award, you know where to go to look for coverage, you know where to go to look for classifications. They're all set out the same, but the wording itself is often so vague and so unclear that you could sit there and navel gaze for hours going,
and the other thing too, because of that, normally gets clarified in a common law test case of which nobody wants to be a party for.
Yeah.
We've had one organisation that's taken a few for the team on that one. But getting back to some of and I understand where the good intentions of domestic violence leave come from. I absolutely, but once again, getting back to who it's written by, and I say this with the greatest of respect, irrespective of which government is in power, they live in the Australian Capital Territory.
The Canberra bubble.
And I love Canberra. However, when you are living inside policy world all the time, and yes, they consult with business, it's still, I understand they're putting together legislation for best practice. I understand that. But when you then start having a chat to small business and medium business, even businesses, bigger businesses like ours, and then all the what if questions come up. Now, I know you can't legislate for absolutely every single scenario. Just you can't do it. It's like when you're training staff to help them with every business scenario. You can't. I mean, sometimes you just got to look at it on each example as it comes before you. But, oh boy, I think there's a legislative burden. And as I said, the guy running his panel beating business, who's an ace panel beater and is doing really, really well, is just not geared up for all of this kind of stuff. Now, it's a responsibility as employer, absolutely, and that so they'd be getting across modern awards. But you've got to then, quite often what we're having to do is bring in professionals, outsource to people that do this all the time. Now, we've got the means to do that. A lot of businesses don't.
Oh, yeah, and they don't know where to go for help. And I feel like with the domestic, I feel like sometimes governments, they see a problem, they rush through legislation, and
the old sledgehammer to crack a nut,
and it's just not the intention's there, but it's not well thought out, and it doesn't work for either party. Because I'm just imagining, and look, God forbid I'm never in this situation. Well, God forbid, I will never be in this situation.
No.
But if you are a woman experiencing domestic violence and you need to escape, so we've got the issue with the fact that frontline services are very underfunded, and also, let's be honest, really probably concentrated more in urban areas than regional areas. I think women in regional...
I'd be interested in an analysis to see where the balance of it is. If you want to do per head of population, I wouldn't be surprised it's regional.
So, you're a woman, you've got to escape. Often they've got no funds.
And they're isolated.
They're very isolated. So frontline services are hard to get to. But you're working, right? You've got a job and you want to be able to call your employer and say, listen, this is what the situation is. I I feel like this legislation makes it so hard for them because it's been quite prescriptive, right? It's like you've got a court date, okay, or you've got police stuff, okay. Well, we can use highly publicised cases where women have gone to the police. There's no police documentation because the police refuse to believe her. So she can't produce it. She can't go, I mean, the best she could do is get a stat declaration and get it signed off by a JP or a doctor, and hopefully it would be a doctor who would understand what's happening in her life and could sign off on it. Because I think that, you know, the
well,
police
I think in the end
thing,
it's too hard.
yeah, and yet but you flip the coin, and I understand why employers want to be able to say, well, it has to, I'm not just going to accept it from anybody, because you do get malingerers. You do
Unfortunately,
get people,
human nature, they will game a system.
they will get the people that are trying to game it. And so the government, I understand they're trying to balance it. They're trying to balance the needs of the employer with the needs of the employee. I don't necessarily think this legislation is fit for purpose. But on a positive note, at least there's something.
It's the best we've got at the moment.
And if you are a person who's experiencing domestic violence and you can meet the criteria for it, then you are entitled to
getting
paid
back to
leave.
the police, look, I think that attitude has changed substantially. I think sometimes they are hamstrung, and look, and please, I'm not an expert on this, hamstrung with saying if nothing's happened and you feel as though something might happen, they can't act until something actually has happened, or whether they certainly have got heightened training. And I think, look, growing up in a country town like we both did, a lot of this was going on, and in those days, that was between a husband and a wife. The police just didn't get involved. That was called a domestic, and it was nothing happened. No, so a woman might have gone to the police, and the police would have said, well, that's a matter between a husband and a wife to resolve. Now, that is going back quite a while, so we have come in leaps and forward bounds since then. However, you are in a bit of a catch-22, and you're right. I think, once again, some of the legislation's written by people that live in an urban environment that have got every single resource at their fingertips. As we all know in New South Wales, when you hit the ACT, because the road is 100% better. So therefore, it's very difficult to understand. Well, yes, you've got to write legislation that's going to cover everyone. And of course, not everyone lives in that kind of environment. And the ACT is a little bit different from the rest of us too, because they do have everything at their fingertips in a very small geographical area. So it's very easy to access. Now, that's not having a go at the ACT. I love Canberra. Beautiful place. But so getting back to domestic violence leave, what people can do is, obviously the Fair Work site is very much a resource. And Fair Work is not just about pay rates, it's about conditions and various legislative changes. I'm on you can actually subscribe to a newsletter if you're really keen, but they'll pop up when something new has passed Parliament. We're normally pretty attuned to that, because obviously we pay a lot of people, both directly and indirectly, our employees. So that's the first port of call, and I think that then starts. Then I know that they've got, there's various, I suppose, lifeline and domestic violence hotlines, but you might have to go and do a little bit of digging for a couple of those.
I know, because I did it. If you Google domestic violence leave, and I was talking about New South Wales, but
well,
it's a federal thing.
It's federal, but the services are state-based.
So, correct. But if you Google domestic violence legislation or law, it will come up to the top with the Fair Work Ombudsman. And for small businesses, they actually have an online guide that you can download, and it will help you work through it. So if you haven't done that, and if someone ever comes to you about domestic violence, first things first, jump onto the Fair Work Ombudsman site, search for domestic violence, and download the resources that will help you understand what your obligations are, and also how best you can support the person.
And those guidelines are baseline. So if you want to do over and above, you are absolutely able to do that. It's just that is the minimum requirement. And then, as I said, I always use the example, look, you pay superannuation's meant to be paid every quarter. Well, if you want to pay every week or every day, you're perfectly entitled to do that. But the maximum you need to go to is 3 months. So it's the same with this. It's baseline, best practice, and you can do more if that's what you want to do.
Exactly. Well, Manda, let's wrap it up. It's a sad topic.
It is a very sad topic, and yes, it's something, it's food for thought, but it is important that businesses out there know, particularly the small businesses, know what is available to them. And on that note, we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye. And of course, if you would like to listen to the SkirtWork podcast, you can find us anywhere where you get your podcasts. And you can also watch us on YouTube, heaven forbid. Lisa and I would much prefer this to be audio, but no, we're being videoed as well. So please subscribe, send us a comment. We would love to hear from you.